How are you waiving the intensity of your training? Most people train at their current highest intensity. When they go to exercise, they're training as hard as they can. What we find is when people try to train as hard as they can on a repeated basis, they end up training at lower intensity than they believe. When you try and train at high intensity frequently, you end up training at moderate intensity repeatedly. And then that moderate intensity starts to plateau and then slowly starts to regress. And over time, you're able to do less and less and less. How do you truly train at high intensity? Only by doing the opposite. You only get the benefit of high intensity when you have fully recovered. And you only get the benefit a couple days or a few days later. So when you're looking at targeting a high intensity workout, if you only have 5 hours before you chop down a tree, spend 4 hours sharpening the blade. So if I have to prepare for this high intensity event, I want to ramp myself up. When I'm looking at the types of training modalities, I want to make sure that the slate's clean. I want to have a no intensity day. As I am starting to prepare to perform the high intensity workout, I need to have a prep day where I'm doing a lower intensity version of it because exercises are skills. So I need a moderate intensity day to prepare my body to execute those same skills. We used to think that taking a day off before a high intensity workout would give us greater benefit. But when we look at the data, they're showing that actually when a person does a moderate intensity workout before a high intensity workout, they end up having higher intensity. But what follows then is a period where you need to clean the slate. Okay, where did things wobble? Where is the maladaptation? Where's the dysfunctional adaptation? How do I clean that up? I also need some way to compensate for those adaptations so I can release the muscle tone. If I don't, I go into the process of residual muscle becoming myofascially dense, creating loss of range of motion, sensory motor amnesia, leading to fear reactivity where my body's protecting itself against exercise. So in general, there are 4 buckets: no, low, moderate, and high intensity. And each has different exercise selections. It's not that you're decreasing the reps or weights 4 times in order to ramp up to high intensity. There's some changes in what you're training. Mobility to clean the slate, pseudo stretches to compensate, to release the tension from the adaptations, both positive and negative, so that you preserve the most benefit from those high intensity days. Biochemically, we follow a lunar cycle, male and female. So across the course of the month, you have several cycles to your chemistry where you're more optimized for certain levels of intensity. Neurobiology calls them infradian windows or infradian cycles. So every 4 to 7 days, you have an optimal amount of energy. If you get closer to applying your intuitive training, you can actually sync up the waves that you do, either 4 or 7 day cycles. If it's 4 days, you're gonna do it 7 times in a month cycle. If it's 7 days, you're gonna do it 4 times in a month cycle. You can sync up to, or what we believe is you can cause syncing by repeating your cycle appropriate to you for long enough that you can cause or induce high performance, induce high intensity, if you follow those waves. So the purpose is both functional and structural. Functional in that you have a certain level of adaptation that you have to follow in order to get maximal benefits that are positive and minimal benefits that are negative. But also there's a tendency in human chemistry for hitting higher performance on particular days throughout the course of the month. Following a program that allows you to sync up to those 4 or 7 day cycles will increase your frequency of experiencing high intensity and decrease the adverse effects of repeating high intensity for too long, decreasing the ability to reproduce high intensity, and eventually leading to injuries. So how do you decide between a 4-day cycle and a 7-day cycle? A 7-day cycle is what most people are acquainted with, the work week. So in those 5 days, your work week generally produces certain challenges. And on the weekend, you're free of occupational demands and occupational stress. So we tend to organize our exercise based upon our jobs. Unfortunately, that's actually a 5-day cycle, 5 days on, 2 days off, or however you organize your exercise. What we find is if you can drop in and program your 7-day cycle 4 times, then you'll be hitting your high intensity appropriate for you in a way that positively impacts your job. In general, 4-day cycles tend to be more effective at producing high intensity more frequently. You'll have 4 7-day cycles, but you're gonna have 7 4-day cycles. 4-day cycles don't always match up with a person that has an occupationally demanding job. So if you have high stress, stress is stress to the body, or a physically demanding job, you can't handle high frequency of high intensity. You want to ramp it down. The purpose is to be better at you, not to hit arbitrary personal records. So take a longer time if you have a physically demanding job, or if your recreation is inherently athletic, like climbing or biking or jiu-jitsu. If the activity that you're doing is inherently athletic, you want to move closer to a 7-day wave than a 4-day wave, because you have to look at the sum total stress. If your job, like being a firefighter or working in a warehouse or working in a quarry, if you have significant physical demands, you want to move towards a 7-day cycle than a 4-day cycle to factor in the sum total stress. But on the times or the jobs that aren't as physically demanding, you can have greater positive adaptation from the 4-day cycle, which will increase the frequency of high intensity more often, but don't fit nicely into the work week model for the month.